18 years of marriage were over. He said, "I'm done," and filed for divorce. I signed the paperwork without a fight and walked away. A few months later, he was hosting a lavish party to announce his engagement to his assistant on the very same beach that was once ours. I arrived with a calm smile, holding a single envelope. His father's will was very clear. Divorce her, and you lose the entire fortune. The quiet was broken by his fiancée's scream. I stood on the bluff overlooking Seacliff Point, watching as 200 guests raised their glasses to my ex-husband's engagement to his assistant. The same stretch of California coastline where Ethan and I had exchanged our vows 18 years ago was now the backdrop for his new life with Sophia Rossi. The vellum envelope in my hand felt cool against my skin. It contained a single, vital document, a copy of Henry Vance's last will and testament, a document Ethan had never bothered to read. Tucked inside was a clause that was about to cost him $25 million. He just didn't know it yet. I slipped on my sunglasses and started down the winding path toward the white-draped pavilions, my sandals sinking into the soft earth with each deliberate step. But to understand how I ended up here, on this cliff with the power to unravel everything Ethan held dear, I should probably explain. 3 months earlier, before the divorce papers were filed, before I even knew Sophia's name, I was still perfecting my role as the ideal investment banker's wife. Our lives operated on an invisible, unspoken schedule that I had long ago memorized. Thursday nights were for the Chilean sea bass, served at exactly 7:30 p.m. Ethan would walk through the door at 7:15, giving himself just enough time to shed his bespoke suit, glance at his phone, and take his seat at our massive, empty dining table. On that final Thursday we would share as husband and wife, though I was completely unaware, I noticed his new cologne before I even heard his key in the lock. Yeah, for 15 years, he had worn a classic Italian scent I first bought for him on a trip to Florence. Then abruptly, 3 months ago, he switched to something new, something aggressive and synthetic that announced its presence instead of subtly suggesting it. "Smells great," he commented on the dinner, his eyes already glued to his phone. A text message brought a fleeting smile to his lips, a micro-expression he quickly suppressed, his face returning to its usual mask of professional detachment. I had spent the entire afternoon coordinating the final details for the Children's Health Foundation Gala, our firm's most important charity event of the year. 3 hours on the phone with caterers and florists, another 2 hours rearranging the seating chart to keep rival managing directors from sitting too close to one another. 45 minutes memorizing the names and personal interests of the new associates' spouses. Ethan would show up at the last possible second, deliver a speech that I had written for him, and graciously accept the praise for an event that had barely been a blip on his radar. "Did you remember that Karen Miller's son just got into Stanford?" I asked, placing his water glass precisely 2 inches to the right of his plate, exactly as he liked it. He mumbled, not looking up from his screen. 6 months ago, he would have made a note, asked which program, and prepared a specific, thoughtful, congratulatory remark for when he saw Karen. These meticulously cultivated relationships were the very foundation of his career, the ladder he had climbed from junior analyst to senior partner. Now it seemed such details were beneath him. The warning signs had started small, like hairline cracks in a building's foundation. First was the obsessive CrossFit membership. Ethan had spent our entire marriage mocking men who wasted billable hours at the gym. Suddenly, he was out the door at 5:30 a.m. for grueling workouts, coached by a 28-year-old trainer named Kev, who sent him motivational quotes that made him grin at his phone. His suits grew noticeably tighter across his shoulders and back. He began checking his reflection in every polished surface we passed. Then came the business trips that didn't align with any deals I was aware of. The receipt from L'Etoile, a notoriously expensive restaurant that fell from his coat pocket when he was supposedly in a late-night partners meeting. The unexplained charges from high-end jewelers on our credit card statement. Each discovery felt like finding a single isolated puzzle piece with no idea of the final devastating picture it was meant to form. Henry, Ethan's father, saw it long before I was willing to admit it to myself. Over the years, we had developed an unlikely and quiet friendship, a bond forged in the shared space of Ethan's neglect. It started when Ethan forgot our anniversary lunch, leaving me sitting alone at a table for an hour. Henry had walked in for a meeting of his own, saw me there, and the shame and disappointment he felt for his son were written all over his face. "Let me at least buy you lunch," he had insisted, sliding into Ethan's empty chair, though it's a poor substitute for my son's lack of consideration. That lunch turned into coffee the following week, then into regular Thursday meetings at a quiet cafe near his office. Henry was everything Ethan was not: present, warm, and genuinely interested in my thoughts rather than my ability to manage his son's life. He told me stories about Ethan's mother, Catherine, who had passed away 8 years prior, how she, too, had spent decades performing the invisible labor of being married to a man consumed by his own ambition, how he had only recognized the depth of her sacrifice after it was too late. "Catherine would have adored you," Henry told me one Thursday, just 3 weeks before Ethan asked for the divorce. "She would have seen what I see, a woman giving her all to a man who has forgotten he's receiving anything." I had brushed it off then, uncomfortable with the direct criticism of my husband. "Marriage is all about compromise," I had said, the words feeling like ash in my mouth. "No," Henry had countered firmly. "Marriage is about partnership. What you have, my dear Claire, is servitude dressed up in designer clothing." Those designer clothes were another sign. Ethan had suddenly taken a sharp interest in my wardrobe, not for my own sake, but for how I reflected on him. Out went the soft, classic pieces I loved. In came severe architectural dresses and towering heels that he claimed made me look more like a senior partner's wife should look. "The Morrison cocktail party is Thursday," Ethan announced that final morning, not asking if I was available, but simply assuming I would clear my schedule. "I have my book club on Thursdays," I said, a small act of rebellion. He looked at me then, truly looked at me for the first time in what felt like months, and his expression was one of mild annoyance, as if a piece of furniture had suddenly voiced an opinion. "Cancel it," he said, his tone leaving no room for discussion. "This is important. Everything Ethan did was important. Every meeting, every dinner, every round of golf that could potentially lead to a new client. My book club, my friends, my passions. They were just minor inconveniences to be managed, not priorities to be honored. Standing here now at his engagement party, watching him laugh with his partners, his hand resting possessively on Sophia's waist, I finally understood that those 18 years hadn't been a marriage. They'd been an intricate, long-running performance where I'd learned my lines so well I'd forgotten I was even on stage. The vellum envelope in my hand wasn't just about revenge, it was about taking my final bow. "I'm done, Claire. I want a divorce." 6 words, delivered to the back of his head as he stared into the refrigerator. I was holding a glass of Chardonnay, and I remember watching the wine tremble, tiny ripples disrupting its placid surface. The hum of the Sub-Zero seemed deafeningly loud, or maybe it was just the vacuum of silence between us, amplifying every sound in the room. I noticed a small water stain on the ceiling I'd never seen before, shaped vaguely like a claw. I focused on it, tracing its outline with my eyes, while my entire world dissolved in the space between the dishwasher and the kitchen island. "That's it?" My voice came out surprisingly steady, a fact that seemed to startle both of us. 18 years, and you're just done? Ethan finally turned, wiping his hands on a dish towel with the same meticulous, dispassionate care he applied to his work. His face was unreadable, professional. The same face he wore for tense negotiations. "We both know this hasn't been working for a while," he said, folding the towel into a perfect, neat square. "It's better to be direct about it." The conversation lasted exactly 10 minutes. I know because I stared at the green digital display on the microwave the entire time, the numbers marching forward, marking the systematic dismantling of everything we had built. Ethan laid out his plan with the cold efficiency of a corporate restructuring. He had already spoken to an attorney. He had already secured a penthouse apartment downtown. He had already had the division of assets calculated. The sheer precision of it all told me this was no sudden impulse. This was months of clandestine planning, delivered in a 10-minute monologue. Over the next 2 weeks, Ethan dismantled our shared life. He only packed his things when he knew I would be out, at the grocery store on Tuesday mornings or during my Thursday pottery class. I would return to find new voids in our home, gaps in the closet where his suits had been, empty spaces on the shoe rack, hangers swaying slightly as if rocked by a passing ghost. He took his father's vintage Patek Philippe, but left the watch I'd given him for our 10th anniversary. He packed his financial textbooks but abandoned the novels we had once read aloud to each other. His wedding ring appeared on the bathroom counter one Wednesday morning, placed neatly beside his sonic toothbrush as if it were just another item on a checklist. No note, no final word, just a band of platinum catching the morning light. I picked it up, feeling its familiar weight, and remembered how he'd fumbled to put it on my finger during our beach ceremony, his hands trembling with what I'd believed was love, but now suspected might have been performance anxiety. I moved into the guest room, unable to bear the indentation his body had left on his side of our bed, but his ghost lingered everywhere. The scent of his aftershave clung to the bathroom towels. The specific coffee mug he used every morning sat in the sink, unwashed, because rinsing it felt like a final act of erasure. Our neighbor, Mrs. Peterson, pretended not to notice when Ethan's Porsche no longer appeared in the driveway. She would offer a tight, pained smile as she walked her poodle, her eyes filled with the discomfort of a person witnessing a quiet failure. The mailman began leaving packages on the doorstep without ringing the bell, as if divorce were some communicable disease. The divorce papers arrived on a Tuesday, exactly 2 weeks after Ethan's declaration. The courier was a young man, barely out of his teens, and his unease was palpable as he averted his eyes and asked for my signature. "Have a nice day," he mumbled, practically sprinting back to his van. I carried the thick envelope into Ethan's former study, now just a room with hollow bookshelves and a desk far too large for the space. The documents were precisely as I'd anticipated, a clean, no-fault division of assets. The house would be mine, along with half our liquid investments, a generous monthly alimony payment that felt more like guilt money than genuine support. 23 pages reducing 18 years of life to a series of line items and subclauses. My sister Megan called while I was on page 12. "Fight him," she urged without preamble. "Get a shark of a lawyer. Take him for everything he's got." "He's being fair," I replied, my finger tracing the cold legal terms. "Fair? He's leaving you for someone else, isn't he?" I hadn't told her about my growing suspicions, about the receipts and the new cologne and the secret gym trips, but Megan had been through her own messy divorce 5 years ago. She could sense infidelity through a phone line. "Does it really matter?" I asked, the words echoing Ethan's own detached logic. "Of course it matters. Don't just lie down and let him walk all over you, Claire." But I wasn't lying down. Some deep primal instinct told me to be still, to watch, to let Ethan believe he was the one directing this entire show. I picked up the Mont Blanc pen he'd given me for our 15th anniversary, a gift presented over a lavish dinner in Paris, when he still looked at me as if I were the center of his world. Using it to sign away our marriage felt like a fitting, if bitter, piece of poetry. Each signature was a deliberate stroke. Claire Sterling Thompson. By the 15th signature, the name started to feel alien. By the 20th, I was already beginning to think of myself as Claire Sterling again, my maiden name waiting patiently to be reclaimed. 3 days after I sent back the signed papers, I met Henry at our usual cafe. His hands shook so much as he lifted his cup that coffee sloshed over the rim. The fury radiating from him was a physical force, a crackling tension in the air between us. "Tell me everything," he said, his voice a low growl that suggested he already knew most of it. I recounted Ethan's cold announcement, his methodical departure, the swift and sterile divorce proceedings. With every word, Henry's jaw grew tighter, his knuckles turning white around the ceramic mug. "Did he give you a reason? He said it wasn't working for him anymore." Henry let out a bitter, sharp laugh that made other patrons turn and stare. That's what his grandfather said when he left his grandmother, almost the exact same words. I hadn't known that piece of family history, and the chilling parallel sent a shiver down my spine. "There's someone else, isn't there?" Henry asked, though it was clearly a statement, not a question. "I think so." He reached across the table and took my hand, his touch surprisingly gentle despite the rage simmering within him. "You deserved better, Claire. You have always deserved so much more than my son was ever capable of giving." We sat in a heavy silence for a moment, the ambient noise of the coffee shop fading into a dull hum. Henry's thumb traced small, comforting circles on the back of my hand, a paternal gesture that made my eyes burn with tears I refused to shed. "I failed him somewhere," Henry said, his voice barely a whisper. "Failed to teach him what truly matters. Catherine would be utterly devastated to see the man he's become. This isn't your fault." I squeezed his hand, but Henry's expression was haunted, suggesting he held a knowledge about his son that ran far deeper than a single failed marriage. Looking back now, standing on this cliff with his will in my hand, I finally understood. Henry hadn't just been commiserating with me that day. He had been arming me. Henry's expression held something far deeper than just paternal anger. It was the look of a man who had long anticipated this day. He reached inside his coat and pulled out a folded document, his movements slow and deliberate. The paper trembled in his weathered hands as he carefully unfolded it on the coffee table between us. 8 years ago, after Catherine passed, I made some changes to my estate plan, he began, his voice low and conspiratorial. I was watching Ethan even then. I saw patterns that deeply disturbed me. The way he behaved at his own mother's funeral, more concerned with the reading of her will than with comforting his own wife. The way he was already calculating the value of her jewelry before we had even buried her. The highlighted section on the page seemed to vibrate with significance, the yellow ink bleeding through the dense legal text. Henry's finger, now steady and resolute, pointed to a single paragraph. I read it once. The words, a meaningless jumble of legalese my brain refused to compute. The second time, my breath caught in my throat. By the third reading, my hands were gripping the edge of the table, my knuckles white. In the event that my son, Ethan Henry Vance, initiates divorce proceedings against his spouse, Claire Sterling Thompson, without documented cause of infidelity on her part, all inheritance rights and claims to my estate shall be rendered null and void. The clause went on, but that one sentence was a nuclear bomb. This can't be legally binding, I whispered, looking up at Henry's grim, determined face. My estate attorney spent 3 months making it ironclad. Every word was chosen for a reason, every potential loophole sealed shut. Henry's satisfaction was laced with the profound sadness of a father who had been forced to build a fortress to protect someone from his own son. The clause only activates if Ethan is the petitioner, he explained. If you had filed or if he could prove you were unfaithful, the inheritance would have remained his. My mind raced, frantically piecing together dates and timelines. Ethan had filed the petition, his name listed as the sole petitioner on every single document. No accusations, no claims of misconduct, just irreconcilable differences and a swift, clean break. He had been in such a rush to begin his new life with Sophia that he had never once considered there might be consequences beyond the division of our current assets. "How much are we talking about?" I asked, though I knew the figure would be staggering. Henry had built his investment firm from the ground up and held valuable patents from his early engineering days. The current valuation of the estate is approximately $25 million, Henry said, his tone flat. That includes the primary investment portfolio, the commercial real estate downtown, the family shares in the firm, and Catherine's art collection. $25 million. The number was an abstraction, an impossible figure. Ethan had spent his entire life with the comfortable certainty of this fortune awaiting him. Every career move, every calculated social engagement, every single sacrifice he had demanded of me, it had all been in service of securing his position as the sole heir to the Vance empire. He's never read the will, Henry continued, a note of deep disgust in his voice. I've asked him, dozens of times over the years, to sit down and review the estate documents to understand his future responsibilities. He always just waved me off, saying he trusted me to handle everything. What he meant was he simply assumed it would all flow directly to him, no questions asked. Just then, my phone buzzed on the table, an Instagram notification. Sophia Rossi had tagged Ethan in a new post, a photo collage of potential wedding venues. The caption read, "Narrowing down our dream location. Can't wait to start our perfect life together." The casual public cruelty of it, flaunting their future while the ink on our divorce was barely dry, made my stomach clench. Henry saw the screen and his jaw tightened. The engagement party is this Saturday, at Seacliff Point. She sent me an invitation. Can you believe the audacity? The same place where you and Ethan were married. The poetic injustice was breathtaking. Ethan proposing to his young assistant and planning to celebrate on the very ground where he had made his vows to me. But now, with this document lying between us, the location took on a powerful new significance. It would not be the site of his triumph, but the stage for his ruin. I should be there, I said slowly, the idea taking shape in my mind even as I spoke the words. To deliver this information. Henry's eyes lit up with a glint of what looked like vengeful pride. I was hoping you would say that. I could do it myself, of course, but for it to come from you, in front of all those people, the impact will be absolute. We spent the next hour plotting, our coffee growing cold as we mapped out the strategy. Henry's attorney would prepare an official, notarized notice to be delivered on Monday. My role was theatrical. I would arrive at the party during its peak, not before, when I might be denied entry, and not after, when the moment would have passed. Henry offered to come with me to stand by my side, but I refused. This is something I need to do on my own, I told him, and he understood immediately. This was no longer about needing support. It was about demonstrating my own strength. It was about standing on my own 2 feet and watching Ethan finally realize that the quiet, compliant wife he had so carelessly discarded was the only thing that had been holding his entire future together. That evening, I stood before my closet selecting my armor, a flowing, cream-colored sundress that moved like liquid, suggesting grace, not grief. Ethan had always pushed me toward dark, severe colors, the blacks and navies that made me blend into the background at his corporate functions. This dress would make me impossible to ignore. I retrieved my mother's gold jewelry from the safe, pieces Ethan had once dismissed as too ethnic for his polished world. The delicate chains and earrings felt like a reclaiming of the identity he had tried to suppress. The oversized sunglasses were not just for effect. They were a shield, ensuring that whatever flickered in my eyes would remain my secret. I rehearsed in the mirror, practicing not just my walk, but my entire presence. The faint, confident smile, the casual but deliberate way I would hold the envelope, the calm, pleasant tone I would use to deliver devastating news. It would be the performance of a lifetime, Henry called that night. The attorney will have the letters ready for a Monday morning delivery to Ethan's office, he confirmed. But your appearance at that party, that, my dear, is what will make this unforgettable. As I hung up, I thought of the Ethan I'd fallen in love with 20 years ago, the ambitious but kind young man who had promised me a partnership. Somewhere along the line, that man had vanished, replaced by a hollow shell who viewed people as assets to be managed or liabilities to be cut loose. Saturday wouldn't just be about the money, it would be about showing Ethan that the liability he'd written off was, in fact, his single greatest asset. Saturday arrived with the kind of brilliant California sunshine that makes everything feel cinematic. I drove toward the coast with the windows down, the salt-laced air whipping through my hair. The vellum envelope sat on the passenger seat, its crisp corners looking deceptively innocent. The parking lot at Seacliff Point was already a gleaming display of luxury vehicles. I parked my modest sedan between a hulking Range Rover and a sleek Tesla, a small smile playing on my lips as I remembered how Ethan used to complain that my car didn't fit the brand. Today, its simplicity felt like a statement of strength. The transformation of the beach was staggering in its extravagance. White silk pavilions billowed in the ocean breeze like architectural clouds. The main tent was a sprawling structure, its peaks soaring toward the sky. Inside, tables draped in cream linen held towering centerpieces of white orchids and pale delphiniums, each one costing more than my first car. I recognized the caterer, the florist, even the string quartet setting up near the water's edge. As they began to tune their instruments, the opening bars of a familiar Vivaldi piece drifted across the sand. Our wedding processional, the same piece I had walked toward, barefoot 18 years ago, to meet a younger Ethan who had tears in his eyes. I adjusted my sunglasses and began my walk toward the main gathering. The warm sand yielded under my feet, and I could feel the ripple of awareness spread as I moved. The first person to recognize me was Karen Miller, a partner's wife who had been to our home for dinner dozens of times. Her champagne flute froze halfway to her lips, her eyes widening in disbelief. "Claire?" she said, just loud enough to make several other heads turn. I offered her a warm, easy smile. "Karen, how lovely to see you. You look wonderful." She stammered, her gaze darting between me and the main tent where Ethan was holding court. The effect cascaded through the crowd. Conversation sputtered and died. Champagne glasses were lowered. I saw faces from 18 years of carefully curated social obligations. People who had ghosted me after the divorce was announced, who had unfriended me on social media with surgical precision. They all stood frozen, watching me with a mixture of shock, discomfort, and a dawning, guilty curiosity. I continued my slow, deliberate walk. Near the main tent, I saw the inner circle. Ethan stood at the center, his back to me, regaling a small group with a story. Sophia clung to his arm, her laugh a high, tinkling sound that grated on my nerves. She wore a white designer dress that was more architecture than fabric, her dark hair pulled into a severe chignon, diamonds flashing at her throat and ears. It was her father, a senior partner named David Rossi, who saw me first. His practiced smile faltered, freezing on his face. He nudged Sophia, who turned, and her own smile dissolved into a mask of pure shock. The champagne glass in her hand trembled, sending ripples across the gold liquid. She tugged at Ethan's sleeve, her manicured nails digging into the fabric of his jacket. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice sharp in the sudden lull. He turned, his face cycling through a series of calculated expressions. Surprise, quickly suppressed, followed by irritation, which was then smoothed over into a mask of professional composure. Finally, he produced a strained, public-facing smile that didn't come close to reaching his eyes. "Claire?" he said, his voice loud enough for the surrounding audience to hear him take control. "This is a surprise." David Rossi stepped forward slightly, positioning himself protectively near his daughter and his prospective son-in-law. "Mrs. Vance," he said, his tone wary, using my married name as if to put me back in my place. "It's Miss Sterling, actually," I corrected gently. "I've gone back to my maiden name." The correction landed with the force of a small, precisely aimed stone. Sophia's grip on Ethan's arm tightened, her knuckles white. Around us, the party had ground to a halt. 200 guests, all connected to Ethan's professional life, were now a silent, captive audience, waiting to see how the powerful Ethan Vance would handle the sudden appearance of his discarded past at the celebration of his shiny new future. The beach that had witnessed our beginning was about to witness its spectacular end. The silence between us stretched, thick and heavy, while 200 guests held a collective breath. Ethan's jaw was tight. I could see the muscles working as he calculated his next move. He took a step toward me, reaching for my elbow in a familiar proprietary gesture he'd used for years to steer me through crowds. "Perhaps we could discuss this somewhere a bit more private," he said, his voice a low, commanding murmur meant to sound reasonable while asserting his control. I didn't move. I let his hand hover in the empty space between us until he was forced to retract it. A small but significant victory. The vellum envelope felt warm in my hand now, charged with energy. "Oh, I won't be long," I said, my voice clear and pleasant, carrying easily on the ocean breeze. I just wanted to deliver something. It seemed only fitting to do it in person, given the historic nature of this location. Ethan's eyes narrowed, but the plastic smile remained plastered on his face. Behind him, David Rossi's expression was that of a man watching a multi-million-dollar deal begin to sour. Sophia's breathing was shallow, her chest rising and falling rapidly. "What is this about, Claire?" Ethan demanded, a note of impatience creeping into his tone. I slowly drew the folded document from the envelope, letting the official seal of the law firm catch the late afternoon sun. "It's about your father's will, Ethan. Specifically about a moral clause he had added 8 years ago." The words dropped into the silence like stones into a still pond. I saw phones being subtly raised, their camera lenses glinting. "What are you talking about?" Ethan's voice had lost its smooth control. It was a half-octave higher than usual. "The clause is quite clear," I continued, holding the document just out of his reach. "It states that if you initiated divorce proceedings against me without documented proof of my infidelity, you forfeit your entire inheritance, all of it. The estate transfers to a charitable trust in your mother's name." The blood drained from Ethan's face. For a heart-stopping moment, I thought he was going to collapse. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Behind him, I heard Karen Miller let out a theatrical gasp. "That's not possible," Ethan finally choked out, the words barely a whisper. "Your father's attorney confirmed it's completely ironclad," I said, my voice remaining unnervingly calm. $25 million, Ethan. The portfolio, the real estate, the firm's shares. It's all gone. David Rossi took an involuntary step back, his mind clearly racing through the professional implications. A senior partner stripped of his family fortune was a much less attractive asset. The movement seemed to break Sophia from her trance. She lunged forward, snatching the document from my hand with a vicious tug. Her eyes flew across the page, her lips moving silently as she read. The elegant designer dress now seemed to be strangling her. "This is fake," she spat, her voice high and shrill. "This has to be fake. Tell them it's fake, Ethan." But Ethan was frozen, his lawyer's mind no doubt recognizing the authentic formatting, the notarized seals, the unmistakable language of his father's legal team. His silence was the most damning confession of all. Sophia's gaze darted between the paper and Ethan's ashen face, desperately seeking a denial that never came. She stumbled backward, her stiletto heel catching in the sand and snapping with a sharp crack. With a cry of fury, she kicked off both shoes. "You told me," she began, her voice escalating with each word, climbing toward a scream. "You promised me. The fortune, the properties, the future you sold me on. Sophia, please." Ethan reached for her, but she recoiled as if he were on fire. $25 million, she shrieked, all pretense of sophistication gone. "You let me plan this life, this wedding, based on money you don't even have." The sound that ripped from her throat next was primal, a raw scream of pure, unadulterated rage that sent a flock of seagulls scattering in panic. Guests scrambled backward, their faces a mixture of shock and morbid fascination. "You lied to me!" She crumpled the document and hurled it at Ethan's chest. "Everything was contingent on that inheritance. My father vouched for you because of it." David Rossi's face was now a mottled shade of red and white, his professional standing imploding in this very public spectacle. He moved toward his daughter, but she turned her fury on him. "You knew," she accused, jabbing a shaking finger at him. "You must have. You did the background checks when he joined the firm." Another wave of murmurs washed through the crowd. Background checks that had somehow missed a $25 million contingency clause? The other partners exchanged sharp, meaningful glances. Ethan finally found his voice. "We can fight this. There might be ways to contest it." "Contest it?" Sophia laughed, a hollow, broken sound. "With what? You're worthless. To me, to the firm, to everyone here." She snatched her designer handbag from a nearby table, knocking over a vase of orchids. Water and flowers cascaded across the white linen, a spreading stain of defeat. "The official notification from your father's estate will be delivered to your office on Monday morning," I said into the chaos, my voice cutting through the rising din. "I just thought you deserved the courtesy of hearing it from me first." Ethan finally turned his full attention to me. His eyes were blazing with hatred, but beneath it, I saw something else. A sliver of grudging, horrified respect. He had been completely outplayed, not by legal force, but by his own colossal arrogance. The perfect future he had been celebrating just minutes ago had been built on sand, and the tide had just come in. All around us, the party was in ruins. Sophia was stumbling toward the parking lot, her father trailing behind her, their angry voices carrying on the breeze. Guests were already on their phones, spreading the news through the city's financial and social circles like a contagion. Ethan stood utterly alone in the center of his demolished triumph. I turned my back on him and began my walk away from the wreckage. My heels sank into the sand with each step, leaving perfect impressions that the incoming tide would soon wash away. The crowd of guests parted for me like the Red Sea, creating a silent corridor through their expensive attire and astonished faces. Karen Miller reached out a hand as if to touch my arm, then pulled it back. One of Ethan's younger colleagues gave me a small, almost imperceptible nod, a gesture of pure, unadulterated respect for the tactical takedown he had just witnessed. Behind me, the chaos continued to bloom. I could hear Sophia's sobbing rage mix with Ethan's desperate, pleading tones as he tried to manage a situation that was now utterly beyond his control. As I reached the edge of the parking lot, the hard pavement under my feet felt like a tangible boundary, a crossing from one life into another. The sounds of the party, the murmurs, the distant crash of waves, a single nervous laugh began to recede. I saw my car waiting for me, modest and dependable, a stark contrast to the gleaming symbols of wealth surrounding it. My phone buzzed as I slid into the driver's seat. It was a message from Henry, time-stamped just minutes ago. He must have been watching the clock, waiting. The text was short and to the point. "I trust the delivery was successful. Dinner Thursday. My treat, as always." The sheer normalcy of it, the simple continuation of our routine in the face of the cataclysm I had just triggered, made me smile for the first time all day. It wasn't a strategic smile or a victorious one. It was real. "Wouldn't miss it," I typed back. "Your son now understands the full value of what he lost." My hands were perfectly steady as I started the engine. There was no trembling, no delayed shock, just a profound and solid calm. This wasn't the fragile peace of suppressed emotion. It was the bedrock certainty that comes from finally standing in your own power. I pulled out of the parking lot, glancing one last time at the beach in my rearview mirror. The elegant white pavilions now looked like foolish monuments to Ethan's hubris, temporary structures that would be gone by morning. The ocean kept its eternal rhythm, indifferent to the human dramas played out on its shores. The same sand had seen me walk toward a life I thought would last forever. Now it had seen me walk away from its ruins, toward a future I would build entirely for myself. Revenge, I realized as I drove along the coastal highway, wasn't about the act of destruction. It wasn't about orchestrating a person's downfall. True revenge was simply stepping aside and allowing a person's own choices, their own arrogance, to lead them to their inevitable conclusion. I hadn't created the clause in Henry's will. I hadn't forced Ethan to file for divorce. I hadn't made him lie to his young lover. All I had done was deliver the truth. The rest was just cause and effect, as natural as the tide. Life went on. Monday morning, Henry's lawyers delivered the official notice. By noon, Ethan had been asked to take an indefinite leave of absence from the firm. Sophia's social media accounts vanished, and rumor had it she'd been transferred to the firm's office in Singapore. The $25 million was transferred to the Catherine Vance Foundation for the Arts, where it would fund museums and scholarships for a generation. 6 months later, I ran into Ethan. He was coming out of a small, nondescript coffee shop, dressed in a wrinkled polo shirt and khakis. He looked older, tired, but the arrogant shell he'd worn for years was gone. "Claire," he said, and he actually looked at me. "Ethan." We stood in an awkward silence, strangers bound by a shared history. "I'm working at a small firm in the valley," he offered unprompted. "It's quiet." "I'm glad you're okay," I said, and I was surprised to find that I meant it. "I wanted to apologize," he started, then stopped. "I know it's too late, but I needed to say, I get it now. I see what I threw away." I simply nodded. There was nothing left to say. We turned and walked in opposite directions, finally, truly free. The best revenge hadn't been watching his world burn. It had been building my own from the ashes, a life that was completely, unapologetically mine. If this story of poetic justice had you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when Claire walked across that beach, carrying the envelope that would destroy everything Ethan valued. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more thrilling stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload. End of story.